My father threw a barbecue to celebrate kicking me out. I pulled up to grab my last box and saw a huge banner over the garage. In giant, aggressive red letters, it read, "Goodbye, Freeloader. Don't come back." My Uncle Thomas was wasted, screaming from the patio, 32 years old and no career. Your poor mother had to feed your lazy ass for years. My brother Carter threw a half-eaten hot dog at my car. It bounced off the windshield, leaving a greasy smear. "There's your last free meal, loser," he yelled, raising his beer bottle. Even the neighborhood kids, who didn't even understand what was going on, were laughing and pointing at me like I was a clown in a circus. I didn't react. I didn't scream back. I grabbed my box, walked back to my car, and took a photo of that banner with everyone partying underneath. 2 weeks later, Carter texted, "Talk now. We need you." Uncle Thomas left voicemails crying, "Buddy, I was drunk. I didn't mean any of it." And my dad? My proud, arrogant dad texted, "Call me back, please. I'm begging you." Before I tell you about the absolute disaster that hit them and how I turned their world upside down, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I remember the smell of that Saturday afternoon. It was a mix of cheap charcoal, roasting meat, and stale beer. Country music was blaring from the outdoor speakers I had bought for my dad 2 Christmases ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood there in the driveway, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my modest sedan, just absorbing the scene. It was a neighborhood festival, and I was the human sacrifice. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my boots. The music seemed to dial down just enough so everyone could hear Uncle Thomas slurring his words. Thomas was a bitter man, bleeding money from a nasty divorce and fighting a losing custody battle over his 2 teenagers. He was always looking for someone to look down on to make his own miserable life feel a little bigger. Today, that someone was me. "Look who finally decided to wake up," Thomas hollered, nearly spilling his drink over the porch railing. "Hope you packed your video games, kid. Real life is gonna eat you alive." I kept my face completely blank. A stone wall. Inside, my chest felt like it was wrapped in barbed wire, but I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. I walked past the grill where my father, Robert, stood wearing a ridiculous apron that said, "The Boss." He didn't say a word to me. He just stood there, flipping burgers, wearing a smug, self-satisfied smirk. He looked at me like I was a stain on his driveway. Carter, my younger brother, the absolute golden boy of the family, was leaning against his brand-new Porsche Macan, a car I knew for a fact he couldn't afford. He was the one who threw the hot dog. The grease was still sliding down my windshield. "Don't trip on your way out, Mason," Carter sneered, adjusting his expensive sunglasses. "And don't ask to sleep on my couch when you go broke." I walked through the side door, into the laundry room, and picked up the last cardboard box. On top of the box was a sticky note in my dad's handwriting. It read, "Starter Kit." Inside was a single pack of ramen noodles, a half-used roll of trash bags, and a printed list of low-income apartments in the next town over. It was so petty, so theatrical, that I almost laughed out loud. I carried the box outside. The laughter flared up again as I walked back to my car. I popped the trunk, placed the box inside, and shut it gently. Then, I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I stepped back, framing the shot perfectly. I made sure to get the giant "Goodbye Freeloader" banner, the smoking grill, Uncle Thomas raising his beer, Carter laughing, and my father's smug face. My dad finally spoke up, his voice dripping with condescension. "What are you doing, Mason?" "Collecting evidence for your therapist." I lowered the phone, looked him dead in the eye, and said in a voice as calm as a frozen lake, "No, for later." I got in my car, turned the key, and backed out of the driveway. I didn't spin the tires. I didn't honk. I just drove away quietly. They thought they had won. They thought they were finally cutting dead weight. But they had absolutely no idea that they had just cut the only parachute they had. To really understand the sheer insanity of that barbecue, you have to rewind 3 years. The story doesn't start with a banner. It starts with a funeral. My mother's funeral. My mother was the glue that held the Harris family together. She was kind, resilient, and possessed a business sense that my father completely lacked. When she passed away, there was no massive financial inheritance. The only inheritance she left behind was Harris Furniture, a custom manufacturing business that had been in our family for decades. But more importantly, she left me with a promise. On her deathbed, her breathing shallow and her hand clutching mine with surprising strength, she looked at me and whispered, "Mason, take care of your dad. He doesn't know how to survive without me. Protect the family." I was 29 at the time, living in Chicago, working as a highly paid freelance project manager for tech startups. I made a fantastic salary, had my own life, and was doing incredibly well. But I loved my mother, and I made the promise. A month after the funeral, I moved back to our small town in Ohio to keep an eye on my dad. I thought I would stay for a few months, help him transition, maybe organize his paperwork, and head back to the city. I moved back into my childhood bedroom, set up my computer monitors, and continued running my freelance business remotely. It took exactly 3 weeks for me to realize that Harris Furniture wasn't just struggling. It was bleeding out on the operating table. I sat down with Luke, the company's longtime accountant. Luke was a nervous guy who always looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He slid a stack of ledgers across his desk, his hands shaking slightly. "Mason," Luke said, his voice dropping to a whisper even though we were the only ones in the office. "Your dad. He's running this place into the ground. Since your mom passed, he's missed 2 tax filings. The raw material suppliers have put us on a cash-only basis because he bounced 3 checks. The commercial insurance policy is about to be canceled for non-payment." I stared at the numbers. They were catastrophic. My dad, Robert, was a proud, stubborn man. He was great at building wooden cabinets, but he was absolutely useless at managing cash flow. Instead of cutting costs, he blamed the economy. He blamed lazy workers. He blamed everything but the mirror. "If the bank sees these financials," Luke warned, wiping sweat from his forehead, "they'll pull the business line of credit. If that happens, Harris Furniture closes its doors by Friday. The factory workers lose their jobs. Your dad loses the house." I felt the weight of my mother's dying wish pressing down on my chest. Protect the family. I didn't confront my dad. I knew his ego couldn't handle the humiliation of his son bailing him out. He would rather go bankrupt than admit he needed my help. So, I did the only thing I could think of. I went to the bank. Because of my incredibly high credit score and my substantial freelance income, I was able to set up a new limited liability company, an LLC entirely in my name. Behind the scenes, I quietly took over. I became the personal guarantor for Harris Furniture's entire line of credit. I paid the overdue tax bills out of my own savings. I linked my personal credit cards to the factory's software subscriptions, the delivery truck insurance, and the utility bills. I even started covering the salary of the factory foreman out of my own pocket just to keep the production line moving. Over the course of 30 months, I pumped over $120,000 of my own money into keeping my father's illusion of success alive. Nobody knew. Not Uncle Thomas, who was always hanging around the office looking for handouts to pay for his divorce lawyer. Not the factory workers, and certainly not my dad. To the outside world, Harris Furniture had miraculously bounced back. My dad walked around town with his chest puffed out, accepting handshakes and praises for steering the ship through the storm. And what did I get for saving his legacy? Contempt. Because I worked remotely, my dad didn't view my job as real work. To a guy who spent 40 years breathing sawdust, sitting at a keyboard wasn't a career. It was a hobby. He saw me in the kitchen at 11 a.m. getting a coffee and assumed I was unemployed. He convinced himself that the only reason I lived at home was because I couldn't afford rent. The savior of his company was, in his eyes, nothing more than a pathetic freeloader. The disrespect was a slow, dripping poison, but it became unbearable when my brother Carter moved back into the picture. Carter is 2 years younger than me, and he has always been my father's golden child. If Carter sneezed, my dad would buy him a tissue factory. Carter had coasted through life on a winning smile and a terrifying lack of accountability. He had dropped out of 2 different colleges, blowing through the college fund my mother had painstakingly saved. But in my dad's eyes, Carter was just finding his path. About a year after I moved back, Carter showed up with a sob story about a failed startup in California. Within 48 hours, my dad had fabricated an executive role for him at Harris Furniture. Carter was named the Vice President of Regional Sales, a promotion to a corner office for a guy who couldn't sell water in a desert. Carter's idea of working was showing up at 10:30 a.m. wearing a tailored suit, flirting with the receptionist, and taking 3-hour lunches with potential clients at the local country club. The most infuriating part? Carter convinced my dad that to project success, the vice president of sales needed a company car, not a sensible sedan, a Porsche Macan. And my father, completely blind to the financial reality of his own business, agreed. He signed the lease agreement. But what Robert didn't know was that the lease was instantly rejected by the dealership because the company's credit was garbage. Luke, the accountant, called me in a panic. Mason, they're going to deny the car lease. Your dad is going to start digging into the financials to figure out why. He's going to unravel everything we've been hiding. So, to protect the secret, to protect my dad's ego, I used my personal credit to back the lease on my lazy brother's luxury SUV. Every time I heard the engine of that Porsche roar into the driveway, it felt like a slap in the face. I was literally paying for my brother to drive a sports car while he treated me like garbage. The dinner table became a daily psychological warfare zone. I remember one Tuesday evening vividly. We were eating pot roast. Carter was talking loudly about a huge account he was this close to landing. It was total fiction. I had access to the CRM software. Carter hadn't logged a single legitimate lead in 4 months. That's my boy, my dad beamed, clapping Carter on the shoulder. That's how you hustle. You have to be out there in the trenches, shaking hands, making things happen. My dad then turned his gaze to me. His smile vanished, replaced by a look of sheer exhaustion, as if my very existence was a heavy burden he was forced to carry. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a folded envelope, and tossed it across the table. It landed on my plate, soaking up some gravy. Utility bill for the house, my dad said gruffly. Since you're home all day using up the electricity, the least you could do is chip in. If you can scrape together a few bucks from your computer games or whatever it is you do in your room all day. I stared at the envelope. I was currently running 3 massive tech deployments for companies in Silicon Valley. I had made more money before lunch that day than Harris Furniture had made in the entire month. More importantly, the house's electricity, water, internet, and property taxes were all linked to my credit card on autopay. He was handing me a bill I had already paid. Carter laughed around a mouthful of potatoes. Don't stress him out, Dad. Mason's busy fighting virtual dragons. Maybe he can pay you in gold coins. My jaw tightened. A muscle fluttered in my cheek. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull out my bank statements, slam them on the table, and watch their smug faces melt into horror. I wanted to yell, I own you. I own that car. I own the roof over your head. But I didn't. I just picked up the gravy-stained envelope, wiped it off with a napkin, and put it in my pocket. I'll take care of it, Dad, I said quietly. See that you do, my dad muttered, turning back to Carter. Now, tell me more about this golf tournament you're hosting for the clients next week. I sat there chewing my food, tasting absolutely nothing. The promise to my mother was becoming a prison sentence. I was burning myself alive to keep them warm, and they were complaining about the smoke. Every man has a breaking point, a moment where the scale tips, the illusion shatters, and you realize you've been playing by rules that only apply to you. My breaking point didn't happen during a screaming match. It happened on a quiet, breezy Thursday night. It was around 1 a.m. I was in the kitchen getting a glass of water after finishing a marathon coding session. The house was completely dark, but I heard the faint murmur of voices coming from the back patio. The sliding glass door was open a crack to let the evening breeze in. I walked quietly toward the door, intending to shut it, when I heard my name. It was Uncle Thomas. He sounded a few beers deep, his voice raspy and loud. "I'm telling you, Robert, you're looking at this all wrong. The boy is 32 years old. He has no wife, no real job, and he's hiding in your house. It's pathetic. He's making the family look bad." I froze. I pressed my back against the wall next to the sliding door, holding my breath. "I know, Thomas." My dad sighed heavily. The sound of a lighter flicked, followed by the smell of cigar smoke drifting into the kitchen. "It keeps me up at night. I don't know where I went wrong with him. His mother babied him too much. Now he's just soft. A freeloader. You need to show him tough love," Uncle Thomas pressed, leaning into his agenda. "You're bleeding cash right now, Bob. You've got the factory overhead. You're paying me for the consulting work." Thomas didn't consult on anything. He just collected a check. "And you're feeding a grown man. Cut the dead weight." Then Carter's voice chimed in. I didn't even know he was out there. "Honestly, Dad, it's getting embarrassing. I had clients over last week, and Mason was just sitting on the porch in sweatpants looking at his laptop. It projects a bad image for the company. Plus," Carter paused, and I could hear the greed in his voice. "If we kick him out, I could knock down the wall between his room and the guest room. Make a proper master suite. Maybe put a home gym in there. It would really help me decompress after closing all these deals." A home gym. My brother wanted to throw me out onto the street so he could have a place to put a treadmill he would never use. I waited for my father to defend me. I waited for him to say, "No, he's my son. He stays as long as he needs." I waited for the man I had secretly saved from absolute ruin to show a single ounce of loyalty. "You make a fair point, Carter," my dad said slowly. "A man needs space to grow. Letting Mason stay here is stunting him. If I force him out, maybe he'll finally wake up and get a real job. Hit rock bottom, build character. Yeah. I'll give him an eviction notice at the end of the month." "Cheers to that," Uncle Thomas grunted. I heard the clinking of glass bottles. They were drinking to my eviction. I stood in the dark kitchen, the glass of water trembling in my hand. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel the sting of rejection. I felt a cold, terrifying clarity wash over my entire body. The barbed wire around my chest snapped. The heavy burden of my mother's dying wish dissolved into thin air. Protect the family. I had protected them. But they weren't family anymore. They were parasites. I didn't storm outside. I didn't confront them. I poured the water down the sink, walked silently back to my bedroom, and locked the door. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark room. I opened a new spreadsheet. I titled it Operation Ripcord. For the next 4 hours, I didn't sleep. I meticulously documented every single financial tether connecting me to Robert, Carter, Thomas, and Harris Furniture. Every credit card, every auto pay, every insurance policy, every vendor account. The list was staggering. I had built a massive, invisible scaffolding holding their entire world up. I looked at the numbers. If I pulled my support suddenly, it wouldn't just be a bump in the road for them. It would be an absolute, unmitigated financial apocalypse. The factory would seize up in days. The house would default. The Porsche would be repossessed. I stared at the screen, my jaw set, a single vein throbbing in my temple. They wanted me gone. They wanted to see me hit rock bottom. "All right, Dad," I whispered to the empty room. "You want to play tough love? Let's play." The next morning, I drove into the city to meet with David. David wasn't just my best friend from college. He was a shark of a corporate lawyer and my personal financial advisor. He was the only person on earth, besides Luke the accountant, who knew the full extent of the financial web I had woven to save my father. We met at a high-end steakhouse. I slid my laptop across the white tablecloth and opened the Operation Ripcord spreadsheet. David adjusted his glasses, scanning the rows of data. He let out a low whistle. "Mason, I've been telling you to cut them off for 2 years. This is financial masochism. But," he looked up, his eyes serious, "if you execute this, if you pull your personal guarantee from the business line of credit and cancel these cards, you understand what happens, right? Tell me, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Say it out loud so I know it's real. Harris Furniture is a zombie company, David explained, leaning forward. It's legally dead, animated only by your credit score. The second you revoke your guarantor status, the bank's automated risk algorithms will flag the account. Within 24 to 48 hours, the bank will freeze all operating accounts. Every check your dad writes will bounce. The suppliers, who already don't trust him, will issue stop shipment orders. The insurance policies will lapse, meaning he legally can't operate heavy machinery or put delivery trucks on the road. And Carter's car? I asked. David smirked. The Porsche lease is tied to the corporate account, which is guaranteed by you. Once the guarantee drops, the dealership will see a massive default risk. They'll ping the GPS tracker and send a repo truck before Carter even finishes his morning latte. Good, I said, closing the laptop. Draft the legal notices. We pull the plug on the 30th. As I was walking out of the restaurant, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number from Oregon. I answered it in my car. Mason? It's Elijah Vance. I blinked in surprise. Elijah Vance was the CEO of a massive logistics firm on the West Coast. 6 months ago, Harris Furniture had completely botched a massive shipment of custom boardroom tables for Elijah's new headquarters. My dad had blamed the trucking company. Carter had ignored Elijah's angry calls. I was the one who had quietly stepped in, used my own network, paid for expedited freight out of pocket, and delivered the tables overnight to save the account. Elijah and I had exchanged a few emails, but I hadn't spoken to him since. Mr. Vance, I said, what can I do for you? Drop the Mr. Vance crap, Mason. Elijah's booming voice filled the car. I'm calling because I fired my chief operating officer this morning. He was an idiot. You know what I hate? Idiots. You know what I like? Guys who solve million-dollar problems at 3 a.m. without asking for credit. I gripped the steering wheel. I appreciate that, Elijah. I don't want to do business with Harris Furniture anymore, Elijah said bluntly. I investigated that mess. I know your father is the bottleneck and your brother is a clown. I know you're the phantom fixing everything behind the scenes. You're wasting your life in that ghost town. Mason, I want you in Oregon. I'm offering you the COO position. The salary is base $300,000, plus stock options, plus a relocation package. But you have to start in 3 weeks. It was a golden ticket. Not just a promotion, but a completely new life. The universe was literally handing me an exit strategy on a silver platter. Elijah, I smiled for the first time in days. Send me the contract. I'll be there. I drove home feeling a strange, intoxicating high. The pieces were moving into place perfectly. But I knew I had to act completely normal at home. I couldn't let my dad or Carter smell the smoke before the fire started. When I walked into the house, my dad was sitting in his recliner, watching a baseball game. He didn't even look away from the TV. Trash needs taking out, Mason, he grunted. Try to contribute something around here. I looked at the back of his head. I thought about the $300,000 salary I had just accepted. I thought about the nuclear bomb sitting in my lawyer's outbox, waiting for my signal. Sure thing, Dad, I said cheerfully. I tied up the trash bag, carried it outside, and threw it in the bin. I was taking out the trash, all right? Just not the way he thought. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in covert operations. I signed Elijah's contract digitally, using a secure network so nothing would pop up on the home router. I found a stunning, modern apartment overlooking the river in Portland, Oregon, and wired the deposit. Everything was set. Now, I just had to erase my ghost from the Harris family machine. I started moving my life out in pieces. I couldn't just pack up a U-Haul in the driveway. That would trigger questions, and my dad would try to spin it like he was kicking me out early. I wanted the illusion to hold until the absolute last second. So, every time I left the house for a coffee run, my trunk was loaded with my most valuable possessions. Servers, legal documents, sentimental items from my mother. I rented a small, climate-controlled storage unit 2 towns over and slowly staged my belongings there, preparing to ship them west. One Tuesday afternoon, I was in my room, quietly packing a box of expensive tech gear. The house was supposed to be empty. My dad was at the factory, and Carter was supposedly golfing with clients. Suddenly, my bedroom door swung open without a knock. It was my cousin Wyatt. Wyatt was Uncle Thomas's son. He was a 20-something slacker who occasionally mowed the lawn for beer money. He stood in the doorway, chewing gum, his eyes darting around my half-empty room, landing on the cardboard boxes stacked in the closet. "Whoa," Wyatt said, leaning against the doorframe. "You're packing. Uncle Robert finally give you the boot." My heart spiked, but I kept my breathing even. I taped up a box, not looking at him. "Just doing some spring cleaning, Wyatt. Reorganizing." Wyatt snorted, stepping into the room. "Right? Reorganizing your stuff into moving boxes. Look man, I get it. The gravy train is over. But hey, if you need help carrying this stuff to your car so Robert doesn't see, I got your back. For $50. I looked at him. He had the same greedy, opportunistic eyes as his father. "I don't need your help, Wyatt, and I'd appreciate it if you kept your mouth shut. This is between me and my dad." Wyatt held up his hands in mock surrender. "Hey, my lips are sealed, bro, family code." He lied, of course. He didn't even make it out of the driveway before he called my dad. I knew he would. It was exactly what I needed to force my father's hand. That night, the atmosphere in the house shifted. When I came down for dinner, the silence was thick and aggressive. My dad was carving a roast chicken with unnecessary force, the knife slamming into the cutting board. Carter was scrolling through his phone, a smug, knowing little smile playing on his lips. "So," my dad said, not looking up, "heard a rumor you're packing up your room, Mason." I poured myself a glass of water, taking my time. "I'm making some changes, Dad. Getting rid of clutter." My dad pointed the carving knife at me. "Don't play games with me, boy. Wyatt told me everything. You know I'm on to you, and you're trying to sneak out in the middle of the night like a coward before I can formally kick you out." Carter laughed, a sharp, annoying sound. "Probably found a cheaper basement to live in. Hey, make sure you steal some toilet paper from the downstairs bathroom before you go, Mason. Every penny counts when you're unemployed." I looked at Carter, imagining the look on his face when the tow truck hooked up to his Porsche. I almost smiled. "I'm not sneaking out, Dad," I said calmly. "I'm just preparing." "You're pathetic," my dad spat, throwing a slice of chicken onto a plate. "I should have done this a year ago. You've sucked this family dry for too long. I'm giving you an official eviction. You have until the end of the month to get your trash out of my house. And I don't want to see your face here after that." This was it, the official ultimatum. He was handing me the detonator. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" I asked, my voice dropping an octave. "Because once I leave, I am not coming back. I won't answer your calls. I won't fix your problems. I will be a ghost." My dad scoffed, puffing out his chest. "That's the best news I've heard in 3 years. You fixing my problems? That's rich. I run a $1 million company, Mason. You play on a computer. I think we'll survive without you eating our groceries." I nodded slowly. "Okay, if that's what you want." I went back up to my room, locked the door, and opened my laptop. I pulled up the Operation Ripcord dashboard. With a few clicks, I deleted my credit card from the house's utility portal. I removed my banking info from the factory's auto-pay system. I drafted an email to the commercial insurance broker, canceling the policy effective midnight on the 30th. And finally, I sent the encrypted message to David. Subject: green light. Execute. The diptych was complete. The fuse was lit. The morning of the barbecue, the day I officially moved out, was surreal. I had spent the previous 2 days shipping my life to Oregon. The only things left in the house were a few clothes, some toiletries, and an empty cardboard box. I woke up to the sound of hammering outside my window. I looked out and saw Uncle Thomas and Carter on ladders, tying a massive vinyl banner to the gutters above the garage. I couldn't read the letters from the back, but I knew it was meant for me. By noon, the yard was filling up. My dad hadn't just invited the family. He had invited neighbors, a few guys from the factory, and anyone else who would listen to his narrative. He was turning my departure into a parade. He wanted witnesses to his tough love parenting. He wanted everyone to see him shedding the dead weight of his freeloading son. I stayed in my room, dressed in clean jeans and a plain black t-shirt, waiting for the right moment. I sat on my bare mattress holding my phone. I had the banking app open. At 1 p.m., I initiated the final sequence. I transferred all remaining funds from the joint accounts I had set up for the business back into my private, secure accounts. I watched the numbers on Harris Furniture's ledgers drop from a healthy 6 figures to absolute 0. Then, I opened my email and hit send on the message I had prepared for the bank. It was a formal, legally binding notification from my attorney, David, immediately revoking my personal guarantee on all Harris Furniture lines of credit. The digital doors locked. The money vanished. The oxygen was cut off. I slipped the phone into my pocket, grabbed my keys, and walked downstairs. The house felt empty, echoing with the booming bass of the country music outside. I walked through the kitchen, where Susan, my stepmother, was arranging a platter of deviled eggs. She looked at me with cold, dismissive eyes. "Make sure you leave your house key on the counter, Mason," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "And don't take any of the good Tupperware. You didn't buy it." "Keep the Tupperware, Susan," I said softly. I placed my house key precisely in the center of the kitchen island. The metallic clink sounded incredibly final. I walked out the side door, into the glaring sunlight and the suffocating smell of barbecue smoke. The music was deafening. That's when I saw the banner in full view. "Goodbye, Freeloader. Don't come back." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. They hadn't just wanted me to leave. They wanted to humiliate me. They wanted to strip me of any dignity I had left. Uncle Thomas spotted me first. He was already swaying, a red plastic cup crushed in his fist. "Hey everybody, the ghost is awake," he hollered, slurring heavily. "Look at him, 32 years old, carrying his little box of failure." Conversations stopped. Heads turned. People I had known since childhood, neighbors I had waved to, were now staring at me with amusement or pity. Carter detached himself from his friends by the Porsche. He grabbed a hot dog from a paper plate and launched it at my car. It hit the windshield with a wet smack. "There's your last free meal, loser," Carter yelled, high-fiving Wyatt. "Have fun living in your car." I stopped halfway down the driveway. I looked at my brother, dressed in designer clothes paid for by a company that was currently flatlining. I looked at Uncle Thomas, whose legal fees I had secretly covered last year so he wouldn't go to jail for back child support. And I looked at my father, Robert. He was standing by the grill, holding a pair of tongs like a scepter. He wasn't laughing, but he was smiling. A deeply satisfied, arrogant smile. He thought he had won. He thought he was the king of the castle, finally purging the peasant. He called out over the music, his voice carrying the authority he so desperately craved. "I told you, Mason, you need to learn how the real world works. You need to learn how to stand on your own 2 feet without bleeding your family dry. Maybe someday you'll thank me for this." I didn't blink. I didn't raise my voice. The absolute certainty of their impending doom wrapped around me like a warm blanket. "Do you want me gone quietly, Dad?" I asked, my voice cutting through the noise with chilling precision. "Or do you want an audience?" My dad widened his stance, gesturing to the crowd. "I want them all to see. I want everyone to know that Harris men pull their own weight. We don't tolerate leeches." "Okay," I said. "Remember that." That's when I took the photo, the flash of reality freezing their arrogance in time. I got in my car and drove away, leaving them to feast on a corpse they didn't know was already rotting. As I drove away from the house, the booming bass of the country music slowly faded, replaced by the hum of my tires on the asphalt. The greasy smear from Carter's hot dog was still on my windshield. I hit the wiper fluid, watching the soapy water wipe away the mess, leaving the glass crystal clear. Felt metaphorical. I was wiping them away. I didn't feel anger anymore. Anger requires an emotional investment, and I had just liquidated all my emotional stock in the Harris family. What I felt was a profound, terrifying sense of freedom. I pulled into a gas station a few miles down the road to fill up the tank for the long drive to Oregon. While the pump was running, I opened the trunk and looked at the cardboard box my stepmother had left for me. The starter kit. I picked up the pack of cheap ramen noodles, the half-roll of garbage bags, and the printed list of Section 8 housing. I looked at them for a long moment. This was what they thought of me. This was my value in their eyes. A joke. A punchline to make them feel superior. I walked over to the large industrial trash can next to the gas pumps and dumped the entire box inside. I watched it tumble down into the dark, mixing with empty soda cups and cigarette wrappers. Exactly where it belonged. I got back in my car, connected my phone to the Bluetooth, and queued up a playlist. I put the car in drive and merged onto the interstate. The sun was beginning to set, casting a golden hue over the horizon. I was heading west. I was heading toward a $300,000 salary, a corner office, and a life where I didn't have to hide my success to protect a fragile man's ego. For the next 3 days, there was absolute silence from Ohio. I knew why. The weekend was a buffer. Banks are closed on Sundays. Automated clearing houses don't process massive withdrawals until Monday morning. For 72 hours, the illusion held. My father probably woke up on Sunday morning, drank his coffee, and felt a deep sense of peace, believing he had finally fixed his life by amputating me. Carter probably took his Porsche out for a spin, blasting music, secure in his fake title of vice president. They were living in a cartoon where the coyote runs off the cliff but hasn't looked down yet. Gravity hadn't noticed them. I spent those 3 days driving across the country. I watched the landscape change from the flat plains of the Midwest to the towering peaks of the Rockies. Every mile I put between myself and that driveway felt like shedding a physical weight. I arrived in Portland late Sunday night. The apartment I had rented was flawless. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River, sleek hardwood floors, and absolute, pristine silence. No Uncle Thomas crashing on the couch. No Carter demanding I turn down my computer noises. No Robert throwing utility bills at me. I ordered expensive sushi, poured myself a glass of scotch, and sat by the window, watching the city lights reflect on the water. I had my laptop open on the kitchen island, but not for work. I had the banking apps open. I was watching the digital tripwires I had set. At midnight Pacific Time, 3 a.m. Eastern Time on Monday, the first alarm tripped. My phone buzzed with an automated alert from the commercial insurance broker. Notice of cancellation, commercial auto and liability policy for Harris Furniture, LLC. Reason, non-payment. Effective immediately. I took a sip of my scotch. The delivery trucks were now legally grounded. If my dad put a driver behind the wheel in the morning, he was committing a felony. 10 minutes later, another alert. The cloud-based inventory management software, the system that ran the entire factory floor, failed its auto-renewal charge. The account was suspended. The dominoes were beginning to fall. The scaffolding had been removed. The mansion was built on quicksand, and the rain had just started. I closed the laptop, finished my drink, and went to bed. I slept deeply and without a single dream for the first time in 3 years. I knew that when the sun came up, the explosion in Ohio would be deafening. And for the first time, I wouldn't be there to jump on the grenade. Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time, the bloodbath commenced. I was sitting in a trendy coffee shop in downtown Portland, sipping an artisanal cold brew, reviewing my onboarding documents for Elijah's company. My phone was face up on the table. I had turned the ringer on, but I hadn't unblocked anyone yet. I wanted to watch the calls come in, not answer them. At 8:15 a.m., the screen lit up. Uncle Thomas. He called once, then twice, then a third time back to back. I could visualize exactly what was happening. Thomas was supposed to pick up a load of premium oak lumber from the supplier across town. He would have pulled the company truck up to the loading dock, walked into the office with his usual arrogant swagger, and slapped the company credit card on the counter. Except the card wouldn't swipe. Declined. He would have tried again, laughing it off as a machine error. Declined. Account frozen. The supplier, who had been burned by my dad's bounce checks years ago before I stepped in, would immediately halt the forklift. No would goes on the truck without cash. Thomas, panicking and embarrassed in front of the warehouse guys, would call the only person who always fixed his money problems. Me. I watched the phone stop ringing. A voicemail icon popped up. I didn't listen to it. At 9 a.m., the factory floor operations would have started. Or tried to. Gabriel, the factory foreman, a good guy who I actually felt slightly bad for, would boot up the main computer to print the day's cut lists and shipping labels. He would be met with a bright red screen. Account suspended. Contact billing. Without that software, the factory was blind. No one knew what to build, what to ship, or who to bill. Gabriel would march straight into my dad's office, interrupting Robert's morning coffee, demanding to know why the system was down. At 9:30 a.m., my phone lit up again. This time it was Carter. He called 5 times in the span of 10 minutes. Then, a flurry of text messages flooded my screen. Carter. Mason, pick up your phone. Carter. The Wi-Fi at the house is down. Did you forget to pay the bill? Carter. Bro, seriously. I have a Zoom call with a client in 10 minutes. Fix the internet. I smiled, taking a bite of a croissant. Carter's fake Zoom call was the least of his problems. I knew what was coming next for the golden boy. At 10:45 a.m., the heavy artillery hit. My phone vibrated violently, sliding across the cafe table. It wasn't Thomas. It wasn't Carter. It was Robert, my father. He didn't call once. He called 8 times in a row. I could picture the scene in his office perfectly. He would have called the bank, furious, demanding to know why his credit cards were declining and why his software was locked. He would have shouted at the poor customer service rep, pulling his, "I've been a loyal customer for 30 years" routine. And then, the bank rep or the bank's lawyer would have looked at his screen and delivered the fatal blow. "Mr. Harris, I'm looking at your file. You don't have a line of credit. Your account has been operating under the personal financial guarantee of Mason Harris, LLC. That guarantee was formally revoked on Friday. Due to your company's abysmal credit history and lack of collateral, the automated system immediately froze all lines of credit to prevent further loss. You are currently overdrawn by $40,000. If you do not deposit funds by 5 p.m. today, we will begin asset seizure protocols." My dad's arrogance would have shattered right then and there. The room would have started spinning. He would realize, in one horrifying moment of clarity, that he wasn't a brilliant businessman. He was a dependent, a ward of the state of Mason. My phone stopped ringing. A text message appeared from my dad. "Dad. Mason. Please, call me back immediately. There's been a massive mistake at the bank. I need you to fix this." He still couldn't admit it. He called it a mistake at the bank. He was still demanding that I fix it. I picked up my phone, unlocked it, and typed a reply. It was the first time I had communicated with them since I left the driveway. I didn't argue. I didn't gloat. I simply sent him the photo I had taken on Saturday. The photo of the giant red banner, "Goodbye, Freeloader. Don't come back," with him smiling proudly underneath it. I hit send. Then, I put my phone on Do Not Disturb, finished my coffee, and walked out into the bright Oregon sunshine to start my new life. The storm had officially made landfall in Ohio, and they didn't even have an umbrella. For the next 24 hours, my phone transformed into a digital graveyard of panicked voicemails, desperate text messages, and missed calls. I didn't answer a single one of them. I just sat in my quiet, pristine apartment in Portland, watching the rain gently hit the floor-to-ceiling windows, and listened to the absolute destruction of their massive egos in real time. It was like watching a slow-motion train wreck where the conductors had spent years bragging about how fast they could drive without brakes. Carter was the very first one to completely melt down. By noon on Monday, the luxury car dealership had pinged the GPS on his Porsche Macan. They didn't even bother calling him to negotiate. When a corporate guarantor pulls out and the corporate credit score is revealed to be in the gutter, banks do not mess around. They just sent a heavy-duty tow truck straight to the country club where Carter was undoubtedly eating a heavily discounted lunch on my dime. Carter left a voicemail sounding like he was on the verge of a literal medical emergency. He was hyperventilating. Through the audio, I could hear the grinding gears of a tow truck in the background. He was screaming that a guy in a high-visibility vest had literally hooked up his car while he was standing there holding a 9-iron. He demanded that I call the bank immediately and fix my glitch. Even then, in the middle of losing his status symbol, he still thought I was just his tech support guy who forgot to hit a button on a keyboard. He yelled that he had a date that night and couldn't be seen taking an Uber. I saved that voicemail to a special folder. Uncle Thomas was next. He sent me a massive wall of text in all capital letters. He was stranded at the premium lumber yard across town. His company credit card was frozen solid, and the supplier, who already hated our family, had publicly humiliated him in front of the entire warehouse crew. Thomas begged me to wire him $500 immediately to cover his electricity bill at home because his personal checking accounts were suddenly overdrawn. 2. The company payroll had bounced, meaning his fake consulting check didn't clear. He called me a traitor in one sentence and his favorite nephew in the next. But the real prize, the ultimate payoff, was my father. Robert called me 15 times between Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning. The evolution of his voicemails was a fascinating psychological study. The first call was pure, unadulterated rage. He ordered me to stop playing childish games and turn the software back on. He threatened to call the police for corporate sabotage. The fifth call shifted into bargaining. He cleared his throat and said he would let me move back into my old room. Maybe even let me park in the driveway, if I just fixed the accounting error and apologized to Carter for the car mix-up. By the 15th call, his voice was entirely different. The arrogant, booming voice of the self-made man, the guy who wore the boss apron at the barbecue, was completely gone. He sounded small. He sounded terrified. The reality of gravity had finally hit him. Mason, his voice cracked on the recording, accompanied by the chaotic sound of factory alarms blaring in the background. Please, the bank is foreclosing on the factory line of credit. The manager says the guarantor pulled out. I don't understand what's happening, Mason. The workers are standing around the floor because the machines are locked by the software company. The lumber yard won't pick up my calls. Please call me back. I'm begging you. Meet me. Let's sit down and fix this like men. Family fixes things. I sat at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of hot black coffee. I had a $300,000 salary waiting for me. I had a beautiful new city to explore. I had a life entirely my own. But I knew that if I didn't face him one last time, he would spend the rest of his life spinning a convenient lie to the entire town. He would tell everyone that a banking error ruined him or the economy or a corrupt supplier. He needed to look me in the eyes. He needed to know that I was the one holding the axe that chopped down his house of cards. I opened my laptop, booked a red-eye flight back to Ohio for that night, and rented a car. I texted him a single address to a cheap, greasy highway diner halfway between his house and the regional airport. I told him to be there at exactly 7 a.m. on Wednesday. No pleasantries, no promises, just a time and a place. The diner smelled like burnt toast, stale coffee, and decades of regret. It was the kind of place truckers stopped at 3 in the morning to stay awake. The neon sign buzzed loudly against the gray, overcast Ohio morning. I parked my rental car and took a deep breath. I reached into the passenger seat and picked up a thick, securely bound folder. When I walked through the glass doors, they were already sitting in a cracked red vinyl booth in the back corner. Robert, Carter, and Uncle Thomas. They looked absolutely ruined. It had only been 4 days since the barbecue, but they looked like they had aged 10 years. Carter wasn't wearing his expensive designer sunglasses or his tailored suit. He wore a wrinkled hoodie and looked pale, constantly shaking his leg under the table. Thomas looked sweaty, his eyes bloodshot, clutching a ceramic coffee mug like it was a life preserver. And my dad sat slumped against the window, staring blankly at the tabletop. The deep wrinkles on his forehead were magnified by the harsh fluorescent lights. I walked over and slid into the booth across from them. I didn't say hello. I didn't order anything from the waitress who hovered nearby. I just placed the thick folder squarely on the Formica table. It was 31 pages long, printed on heavy stock paper. My dad looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. "Mason, thank God you came. Did you bring your laptop?" The bank manager said something about an online portal. "Can you get into the system right now and reverse this? We have a massive shipment due on Friday." "I'm not here to fix your company, Dad," I said, my voice completely flat, devoid of any warmth or anger. "I'm here to show you exactly what you threw away on Saturday." I tapped the thick folder with my index finger. "This is an exhaustive internal financial audit. It was prepared by Luke, your accountant, and it has been fully verified by my corporate attorney in Chicago. It details every single dime, every line of credit, every vendor payment, and every insurance policy that has kept Harris Furniture breathing for the last 3 years." Carter scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. He tried to muster up his usual arrogance, but it fell completely flat. "Oh great, the nerd brought a spreadsheet to a crisis. Mason, we don't need a stupid math lesson right now. We need you to fix the glitch you caused so I can get my car back." They literally dumped my golf clubs on the pavement. I didn't even look at Carter. He was a mosquito buzzing in the background of a hurricane. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my father. "Open it, Dad," I commanded. It wasn't a request. Robert hesitated, his hands physically shaking as he reached out and flipped open the heavy cover. He stared at the first page. It was a summary of the utility bills for his own home. He flipped to the next page. It was a log of the factory's commercial insurance premiums. Page after page, his eyes scanned the highlighted debts, the paid invoices, the massive software subscriptions, and the emergency logistics fees. Next to every single massive number was the name of the payer, Mason Harris. He kept flipping. The silence in the diner was suffocating, broken only by the sound of the paper turning and Uncle Thomas breathing heavily. Robert saw the payroll reserves. He saw the legal fees I had paid to keep Thomas out of jail for back child support. He saw the down payment and the monthly lease transfers for Carter's Porsche. "Turn to the last page, Dad," I instructed quietly. He flipped a large chunk of paper over, landing on the final document. It was a copy of the formal legal notice my lawyer had sent to the regional bank on Friday afternoon. Robert read the legal jargon, his lips moving silently, his face drained of whatever color it had left. He looked up at me, his mouth opening and closing like he was suffocating. He couldn't form a sentence. "I don't understand," he finally whispered, his voice trembling so violently he sounded like a stranger. "This paper says, Mason Harris, LLC. It says you were the sole corporate guarantor." "That's exactly right," I said, leaning forward, resting my forearms on the table to close the distance. "Harris Furniture has been legally and financially dead for 36 months. Dad, your corporate credit score is absolute garbage. Your cash flow is completely non-existent. You haven't paid a single raw material supplier with your own money since Mom died." I did. I let the words hang in the air, watching them hit him like physical blows to the chest. "I put my personal assets on the line," I continued, my voice steady, slicing through the diner's ambient noise like a scalpel. "I created a limited liability company to legally back your entire operation from the shadows. I was your bank. I was your insurance policy. I was your safety net. I was the only reason you could walk around town pretending to be a successful, self-made businessman." Uncle Thomas dropped his coffee mug. It slammed onto the table, spilling hot black liquid across the vinyl. But nobody even flinched. Carter was staring at me with his mouth wide open, finally realizing the sheer magnitude of what I had done. "You called me a freeloader," I said, the memory of that banner flashing in my mind. "You threw a massive neighborhood party to humiliate me. You hung a banner on your garage to celebrate kicking out the one and only person who was actively paying the mortgage on that very garage. You wanted to teach me how the real world works. Well, Dad, welcome to the real world." "Mason," my dad choked out, a tear finally breaking loose and rolling down his weathered cheek. He reached across the table, desperately trying to grab my arm. "You can't do this. You're my son. The factory is our legacy. It's your mother's legacy. I'll give you a promotion. I'll fire Carter today. I'll make you a full partner. Just call the bank and tell them you're back." I pulled my arm back sharply, absolutely disgusted by his touch. "I don't want a partnership in a bankrupt ghost ship. And don't you dare bring Mom into this. I stayed in that house because I promised her I would take care of you. But I am done protecting a man who hates me for saving him. You wanted me out of the house so Carter could have a home gym. Congratulations, Dad. You have the whole house to yourselves now. At least you do until the bank auctions it off next month." My dad buried his face in his hands, letting out a gut-wrenching sob. It was the sound of a man watching his entire identity burn to the ground. Carter didn't say a word. For the first time in his miserable life, he was completely speechless. I stood up from the booth. I pulled a crisp $20 bill from my wallet and dropped it on top of the spilled coffee on the table. "There's your last free meal, Carter," I said, echoing the words he had screamed at me just 4 days prior. I turned my back on them and walked out the door. I didn't look over my shoulder. The little bell above the diner door chimed brightly, ringing in my absolute, undisputed freedom. The cold Ohio air hit my face, and I took the deepest, cleanest breath of my entire life. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. By the time my return flight landed safely back in Oregon, the denial phase was officially over, and the sheer desperation phase had fully kicked into high gear. I turned my phone off airplane mode while walking through the terminal, and it immediately buzzed with a fresh wave of notifications. The dynamic of the family had completely fractured. Uncle Thomas, realizing the gravy train had permanently derailed, completely turned on my father. He left a venomous voicemail blaming Robert for everything, calling him an arrogant fool for chasing me away. In the very next breath, Thomas begged me to hire him as a logistics consultant at my new job in Portland. I deleted the voicemail before he even finished his sentence. Carter, the guy who threw a hot dog at my windshield and laughed at me in front of the neighborhood kids, actually had the absolute audacity to text me. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge the diner meeting. He just sent a massive paragraph asking for a $10,000 personal loan because he couldn't afford his luxury apartment rent without his fake salary, and his credit cards were all maxed out. He promised he would pay me back with interest. I took a screenshot of the text for my own amusement and left him on read. Then came the formal email from my father. He had somehow scrounged together enough cash to hire a cheap local lawyer to draft a desperate contract. The email contained an attachment offering me 20% equity in Harris Furniture if I would immediately reinstate my personal guarantee and fund the payroll. 20%. He was offering me 20% of a company that had a negative net worth, millions in debt, and zero credit. He was still trying to negotiate from a position of power he didn't possess. He still thought he was the boss throwing me a bone. I didn't reply to any of them. I didn't need to say another word. I forwarded the texts, the voicemails, and the ridiculous contract directly to David, my brilliant corporate lawyer in Chicago. The very next morning, David sent formal cease and desist letters via certified overnight mail to Robert, Carter and Thomas. The legal document was aggressive and ironclad. It clearly stated that any further attempts to contact me, harass me, or coerce me into financial agreements would be met with immediate and severe legal action, including suing for the massive undocumented loans I had provided them over the years. I drew a hard, permanent boundary in the concrete. I was no longer the family punching bag, I was no longer the invisible fix-it man, and I was definitely no longer their personal ATM. The cord was cut. Over the next few months, I got updates indirectly through Luke, the accountant. He was a smart guy and had managed to jump ship and find a new job at a reputable firm quickly. But he lived in the same town and kept a close eye on the smoldering wreckage of Harris Furniture. The fallout was nothing short of biblical. It was karma delivered on a silver platter. Without my credit backing the company, the regional bank moved in aggressively. They didn't offer payment plans. They seized the factory equipment, the delivery trucks, the raw materials, and all remaining finished inventory to cover the massive overdrawn accounts. The factory doors were chained shut and padlocked. Decades of family history, gone because an arrogant man couldn't say thank you. But it got so much worse for Carter. During the bankruptcy proceedings, the bank initiated a standard forensic audit of the company's expenses leading up to the default. The auditors dug into the ledgers and found out that Carter hadn't just been a lazy, incompetent employee. He had been actively embezzling funds. He had been writing off massive personal expenses, luxury dinners at steakhouses, expensive designer clothes, and weekend vacations to Las Vegas, under the guise of client acquisition costs. Because the company was now officially bankrupt and the corporate veil was pierced, the creditors went after Carter personally for fraud. He was facing massive legal fees he couldn't afford and the very real threat of criminal charges. And the house, the beautiful, sprawling childhood home where my father stood on the driveway in his apron and smirked at me, it went straight into foreclosure. Robert couldn't afford the sky-high property taxes or the mortgage payments without his artificially inflated salary. The bank foreclosed, and the house was sold at a public auction for pennies on the dollar to a real estate developer who planned to tear it down. The neighborhood barbecue that was meant to be my ultimate humiliation turned out to be the final celebration of the Harris family. It was their last meal on the Titanic. I took the photo I had snapped on my phone that fateful Saturday, the one with the giant red banner reading "Goodbye Freeloader," and my family laughing underneath it holding their beers. I printed it out on high-quality photo paper, put it in a sleek, minimalist black frame, and set it on the corner of my massive mahogany desk in my new corner office in Portland. It wasn't a trophy of vengeance. I didn't look at it to gloat. It was a daily, powerful reminder to never set myself on fire just to keep someone else warm. A full year passed. The seasons changed. The rain washed away the dust of my old life, and my new reality in Oregon blossomed into everything I had ever dreamed of. As the chief operating officer for Elijah's massive logistics firm, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving on a level I never thought possible. I was leading a team of brilliant minds, restructuring national supply chains, and driving real, measurable growth. I was respected. When I solved a massive logistics issue that saved the company $2 million in shipping costs, Elijah didn't roll his eyes and tell me to go take out the trash. He walked into my office, handed me a massive bonus check, and took me out for a celebratory steak dinner at the best restaurant in town. I bought a beautiful modern house in the hills overlooking the city, surrounded by towering pine trees and fresh air. I built a tight-knit circle of friends who valued me for my character, my humor, and my loyalty, not for what they could secretly extract from my bank account. Most importantly, I had peace. Pure, unadulterated, uninterrupted peace. I didn't wake up at 3 a.m. with chest pains, dreading the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway or the inevitable passive-aggressive insults at the breakfast table. My phone only rang with good news. The trauma of the past was fading into a distant, blurry memory. I had finally learned how to breathe. Just when I thought the Ohio chapter was fully closed and buried in the past, I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from Gabriel, the old factory foreman who used to run the floor at Harris Furniture. We caught up briefly over a phone call, trading stories about our new jobs. But before we hung up, he dropped a piece of information that absolutely extinguished any lingering guilt I might have carried deep down in my soul. Gabriel told me the full truth that came out during the messy public bankruptcy hearings. It turned out Carter's sales job wasn't just a cover for his laziness. He had actively sabotaged the company from the inside out to fund his massive underground gambling debts and his flashy, fake lifestyle on social media. Carter had secretly downloaded Harris Furniture's exclusive client lists, our proprietary manufacturing blueprints, and our pricing models. He sold all of that confidential data to a massive rival manufacturer in the next state over for a quick cash payout. Carter had literally sold our family's competitive advantage. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part, the detail that made my blood run ice cold, was that Robert knew. Gabriel testified that my dad had caught Carter emailing the files months before the barbecue. But instead of firing him, calling the police, or holding him accountable, Robert covered it up entirely. He chose to protect the golden child who was actively robbing him blind. To cover the financial losses from Carter's betrayal, Robert conspired with Uncle Thomas to kick me out, hoping to use the money they saved on my groceries and room to plug the massive hole Carter had blown in the ship's hull. Hearing that truth was the final key turning in the heavy iron lock. They didn't just stumble into disaster. They orchestrated it. They protected the parasite and tried to slaughter the workhorse. I hung up the phone with Gabriel feeling completely weightless. A few weeks after that conversation with Gabriel, I was sitting on my back patio on a beautiful Saturday evening. The sky was painted in shades of purple and orange as the sun set over the mountains. I had a glass of expensive wine in my hand and a good book on my lap. My phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown local number from Ohio. Against my better judgment, curiosity got the best of me, and I answered it. Mason. The voice on the other end was weak, raspy, and sounded incredibly old. Took me a second to recognize it. It was Robert. He didn't sound angry or arrogant. He sounded utterly defeated. He told me he was currently living in a cramped, moldy, one-bedroom apartment on the bad side of town. He said Carter had moved out of state to avoid his legal issues and completely stopped returning his calls. Uncle Thomas was entirely out of the picture, having burned his bridges with everyone else. Robert was completely alone. I was going through some old cardboard boxes today. Mason, Robert said, his voice trembling slightly, trying to inject a tone of nostalgia that felt completely unearned. I found some of your mother's old handwritten recipe cards, the ones she used to make on Sundays. I thought, maybe you'd want them. Maybe you could fly out here to get them. We could go get dinner. Family is still family, right, son? I closed my eyes. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was playing the ultimate victim card. He was using my dead mother's memory as emotional bait to try and reel me back into his miserable life because he had exhausted every other resource, burned every bridge, and alienated every person on the planet. He wanted a lifeline. I looked out at the beautiful horizon. I felt my pulse. It was completely calm. There was no anger, no resentment, no sadness. Just pity. Family is family, Dad, I said quietly, my voice firm and unwavering. But family doesn't hang a banner on the garage celebrating kicking out their savior. You made your choice in the driveway that day. You chose your audience. Now you have to live with them. I hung up the phone. I didn't block the number. I just deleted the call log. He was a ghost to me now, an echo of a life I no longer recognized. A few days later, a small, heavily insured package arrived at the reception desk of my office in Portland. It was from David, my lawyer back in Chicago. He had finally finished the absolute last of the legal severance paperwork with Robert's bankruptcy attorneys. Everything was officially dissolved. Inside the padded envelope was a small, dark blue velvet box. I took it into my office, shut the heavy glass door, and sat at my desk. I opened the box slowly. Resting on the velvet was an antique silver pocket watch. It was my mother's pocket watch. She had carried it with her everywhere she went, a family heirloom passed down from her grandfather. Robert had kept it locked away in a safe, but David had legally mandated its return to me as part of the settlement agreement since it belonged to her side of the family. I carefully lifted the heavy silver watch. Tucked underneath it in the box was a small, faded piece of paper. It was a note, written in my mother's elegant, sloping handwriting. I recognized it immediately. It read, "For Mason, my strong boy, keep ticking. Love, Mom." I sat alone in my corner office, holding the cold silver in my palm, feeling the intricate engravings on the casing. The tears came slowly at first and then all at once. But they weren't tears of sadness, and they certainly weren't tears of regret. They were tears of absolute, profound relief. A massive, suffocating weight lifted off my chest and dissolved into the air. I realized right then, looking at her handwriting, that I had kept my promise to her. I had protected the family for as long as there was a family worth protecting. I had given them my money, my time, and my sanity. But when they turned into monsters, when they actively plotted to destroy me to save the brother who was robbing them, I did the only thing a strong person could do. I protected myself. I was never the freeloader. I was the lifeboat, and when they decided to drill holes in the floorboards to see if I would sink, I simply stepped off the boat and let them drown in the mess they created. I didn't lose my family. I survived them. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I hope this resonated with you in some way. It took me an incredibly long time, and a lot of painful lessons, to realize that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's absolutely necessary for your own survival. You cannot save people who are determined to destroy themselves. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved because they were taking advantage of you? Let me know your story in the comments. We can all learn from each other. Also, if you made it all the way to the very end of this video, you are officially part of the 1% Club. I want you to comment the letter W below. W stands for winner. That's our secret code to recognize the people who have the attention span, the empathy, and the dedication to listen to a real, emotional story from start to finish. I read every single comment with a W in it, and I appreciate you more than you know. Please don't forget to hit that like button and follow the channel. We have a lot more stories to share, and I want you to be here for the next one. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next video.